The message arrived just after midnight, when the city outside her window had gone quiet enough to hear her own thoughts. One sentence, no name, no greeting. "We pay well for your voice." She read it twice, then locked her phone and set it down like it might burn her fingers. The room smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Her rent notice lay open on the table, folded and unfolded too many times to feel like paper anymore. Her phone vibrated again. Tonight only. She unlocked the screen. "What do you mean by my voice?" she typed. The reply came instantly, as if someone had been waiting with their finger already hovering. "You read. He listens." That was all. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks above her bed. She had read aloud before, late-night recordings, small gigs. People liked the calm in her voice, the way it slowed their thoughts. Some said it helped them sleep. Some said it made the night feel less empty. This message felt different. "Where?" she typed. An address appeared. No explanation, no reassurance. Just a location far from the bright parts of the city, where the streets grew wider and the houses older. She checked the number they offered again. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just generous, it was precise. Like they knew exactly how much it would take for her to say yes. She didn't reply right away. The room felt smaller than it had an hour ago. The walls pressed in. The silence pressed harder. Her phone vibrated again. "You won't be touched," she swallowed. "You won't be recorded." Her fingers trembled slightly. "You can leave at sunrise." That line stayed on the screen longer than the others. She closed her eyes. Money had a way of making fear negotiable. She replied with a single word. "Okay." The cab dropped her off at the end of a quiet street. No shops, no traffic, just tall houses standing back from the road, like they were keeping secrets from one another. The address matched the largest one. Only one. Window glowed faintly on the upper floor. She stood there longer than she meant to, listening. No music, no voices, just the soft rustle of leaves against stone. The door opened before she knocked. A man stood there, early 30s, dressed neatly despite the hour. His expression was neutral, unreadable, but his eyes moved with careful attention, taking in her posture, her stillness, the way she held her bag close to her body. "You're on time," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her without a sound. The house smelled of polished wood and something faintly medicinal. The lighting was low, intentional. Shadows rested in corners like they belonged there. He held out his hand. "Your phone." She hesitated, then placed it in his palm. "You'll get it back in the morning," he said, already turning away. "Follow me." They walked up a wide staircase that creaked softly beneath their steps. The sound felt loud in the stillness. The air grew warmer as they climbed, heavier, like the house held its breath at night. At the top, he stopped and turned to face her. "You will read until sunrise," he said. "You won't ask questions. You won't stop unless told to." "And him," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Who is he?" The man's gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long. "He needs your voice," he said simply. "That's all you need to know." He opened the door at the end of the hall. The room was dim, lit by a single lamp near the bed. Heavy curtains sealed out the night. The air inside felt warm, close, almost intimate. A man lay on the bed, turned slightly away from the door, awake, still. She felt it immediately, the weight of presence, not threatening, just aware. "There's a chair," the assistant said quietly. "Sit close enough that he can hear you clearly." She sat. The chair was closer than she expected, close enough to feel the heat of his body through the air, close enough that she became conscious of her own breathing. A book was placed in her hands. Old, leather-bound, no title. "Read softly," the assistant said. "If you stop, he wakes fully." The words didn't make sense, but the tone told her not to ask. The door closed. She was alone with him now. She opened the book. The first words came out carefully, testing the room. Her voice felt different here, like the walls were holding it instead of letting it drift away. The man's breathing changed. Not sleep, attention. She read on. Each sentence settled into the space between them, heavy and deliberate. She became aware of small things she would normally ignore. The faint sound of fabric shifting when he inhaled. The warmth brushing her skin when she leaned forward slightly to turn the page. She didn't look at his face yet. Minutes passed. Then more. Her voice found a rhythm. Slow, even, intimate without trying to be. The man did not move, but she could feel him listening in a way that felt almost physical, as if her voice was something he could lean into. The longer she read, the quieter the world became. No outside noise reached them. No clock ticked loud enough to count. There was only the sound of her voice and the steady rise and fall of his chest. She shifted in the chair, adjusting her legs. The movement felt loud, immediate. His breathing sharpened for a moment, then settled again. She felt a strange pull in her chest. Not fear, not excitement, something more subtle. The awareness of being needed without being known. She kept reading. The story spoke of long nights and waiting, of people who stayed awake for reasons they never explained. The words felt chosen, too precise. Her voice softened without her meaning to. The man exhaled slowly. She realized then that this wasn't about entertainment or distraction. This was about presence. Her voice wasn't filling. Silence. It was holding something together. She glanced at him finally. His eyes were open, focused somewhere past her, but the attention was unmistakable. He wasn't looking at her body. He wasn't watching her face. He was listening to her mouth. The realization sent a quiet heat through her chest. She read on, careful not to rush, careful not to let her voice drop too low, too close. The boundary felt thin, but intact. Hours stretched ahead of her. Outside, the night deepened. And as her voice continued to move through the room, steady and unbroken, she understood something she hadn't expected when she agreed. This night wasn't just about the money. It was about what her voice could do when someone needed it enough to pay for silence, darkness, and time. Her voice no longer felt like it belonged only to her. It moved through the room differently now, slower, fuller, as if the air itself had learned how to carry it with care. Each word left her lips and settled somewhere between the chair and the bed, forming a quiet bridge that neither of them crossed, yet both depended on. The man's breathing had changed again, not sharply, not suddenly. It had deepened, stretching longer with each inhale, as if her voice were gently pulling him downward into a place he trusted, but rarely visited. He did not sleep. She could feel that clearly. Sleep had an absence to it. This was presence. She kept reading. The story in the book felt old, but not distant. Its words spoke of nights that lasted longer than they should have, of people who learned to survive by listening rather than speaking. The sentences were simple, but the spaces between them felt heavy. She became aware of her posture. The way she sat forward slightly, careful not to lean. Too close, careful not to pull away. The chair pressed against the back of her legs, warm now from hours of stillness. Her throat tingled, a reminder of time passing. She swallowed quietly and adjusted her tone, letting the sound drop lower so it would carry without strain. The man responded without moving. His chest rose more fully. His shoulders softened against the mattress. Something in him loosened, as if her voice were carefully untying a knot he had lived with for too long. She did not look at his face again, not because she was afraid, because listening felt more powerful than seeing. The room seemed smaller now, though nothing had changed. The lamp cast a soft circle of light that barely reached the walls. Everything beyond it felt distant, unimportant. The night outside pressed closer, sealing them in. She read on. At some point, the idea of time slipped away. There was no before this moment and no after it. There was only the next sentence, the next breath, the next pause shaped carefully so it would not break what she was holding together. Her voice began to warm, not in volume, but in texture. She felt it resonate in her chest, steady and controlled. The sound filled her as much as it filled the room. The man shifted beneath the sheet. It was subtle, a change in the angle of his body, a slight turn toward her that shortened the distance between them without closing it. Her fingers tightened briefly on the edge of the page. She did not stop reading. The awareness between them sharpened. Not desire, not yet. Something quieter. The knowledge of closeness without permission, of intimacy built on restraint. She could feel his attention like a weight against her skin. The book spoke of a traveler who learned to navigate darkness by sound alone, of how voices became landmarks, of how losing them felt like losing direction entirely. Her voice softened. She did not plan it. It happened naturally, drawn closer by the stillness in the room. The words slowed, stretched, allowed to breathe. The man exhaled deeply, a sound that carried relief more than fatigue. Her chest tightened in response. She wondered how many nights he had listened like this, how many voices had tried and failed to stay steady until morning, how many had rushed or grown curious, or broken the silence with questions that pulled him out of the fragile state he clung to. The thought made her careful. She read as if precision mattered. Her voice dipped slightly at the end of each sentence, creating a rhythm he could follow. She allowed pauses just long enough to be felt, not long enough to be empty. The lamp flickered faintly, then steadied. The shadows shifted, stretching across the floor. She noticed the warmth in the room had increased. Or perhaps she'd only become more aware of it. Her skin felt sensitive, alert. Every small movement echoed inside her. She adjusted her legs, slowly this time, mindful of the sound. The fabric of her dress whispered against the chair. The man's breathing caught for a fraction of a second. She felt it immediately. Her voice remained even, but something inside her stirred. Not fear, not excitement, awareness. She had learned his responses without ever being taught them. The knowledge felt intimate. She read on. The story moved into a quieter section. Fewer words, more space. She handled it with care, letting the silence settle between sentences, like a held breath. The man did not move, but his presence filled the room. The space between them felt charged, alive with attention. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees to ease the strain in her back. The movement brought her closer, without crossing any boundary. The warmth between them grew more noticeable. Her voice followed her body instinctively, lowering just enough to remain clear without pushing. The man's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. She realized then that this was not about comfort alone. This was about control, not domination, not power, balance. Her voice held him in a place where he did not have to defend himself against the night, where he could exist without effort, guided by sound rather than thought. The realization settled heavily in her chest. She continued reading, careful not to rush toward the end of the page. Each word felt like it mattered now, not for the story, but for what it maintained. Her throat burned again. She swallowed, adjusted, found a softer resonance. The man's breathing remained steady. Trust. The words surfaced quietly in her mind. He trusted her not to stop. She trusted him not to reach. The unspoken agreement shaped the room. Hours stretched on. The darkness beyond the curtains deepened, pressing against the glass. The city felt far away, unreal. She was no longer thinking about the money. The thought surprised her when it surfaced. She was thinking about staying steady, about not letting her voice waver, about carrying him through the night without breaking the fragile structure they had built together. Her voice lowered again, almost unconsciously, smoothing the edges of the words. The man turned his head slightly, bringing his face more fully into the light. She caught a glimpse of his profile. The tension in his brow softened now. His mouth relaxed. His eyes remained open, focused on nothing she could see. Listening. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with being watched. Being heard this closely felt more revealing than touch. She read on. The story spoke of dawn as something that had to be prepared for, of how darkness did not simply end, but loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly. Her chest tightened at the thought. She was not ready for morning. Not yet. Her voice continued, steady and low, holding the night in place as long as it would allow. The lamp burned quietly. The room breathed with them. And as her voice filled the space between chair and bed, unbroken and deliberate, the night seemed willing to stay a little longer, as if listening too. The night settled deeper into itself. It was no longer something outside the house. It had entered the room, slipping into the spaces between her words, resting in the pauses she allowed herself to take. Her voice moved through it slowly now, shaped by hours of careful restraint. She no longer felt like a guest. She felt placed. The man on the bed had stopped adjusting his breathing to match hers. It moved on its own now, steady and confident, as if her voice had reminded his body of something it already knew how to do. He was not drifting. He was anchored. She continued reading. The book felt warmer in her hands, the pages softer, worn by others who had turned them in similar silence. She wondered how many nights this room had held the same quiet tension. How many voices had tried to carry the dark without being swallowed by it. Her voice did not waver. She noticed how close she was sitting now. Not because she had moved much, but because awareness had sharpened. The space between her knee and the edge of the bed felt charged, alive with attention. She could sense him there without looking. The warmth of his body reached her like a low current. She read on. The words in the book grew slower, heavier, as if the story itself were aware of the hour. Sentences lingered. Thoughts stretched. Silence became part of the language. She let it be. The man exhaled deeply, then rested more fully into the mattress. His hands, once tense beneath the sheet, had relaxed. His fingers lay open now, unguarded. Trust had settled into the room. Her chest tightened at the realization. This was no longer about staying awake. It was about staying present. She adjusted her posture again, carefully, easing the ache in her back. The movement was quiet, but not invisible. The man's attention shifted immediately, subtle but unmistakable. Her voice did not change. She continued, careful not to rush, careful not to pull away from the rhythm they had built together. The balance felt delicate now, like something that could be tipped with a careless breath. The lamp cast a softer glow, shadows stretching longer across the floor. The walls felt closer, but not confining, intimate. She read a passage about someone who learned to depend on sound more than sight, about how listening became a way of staying alive. The words settled heavily. She felt them resonate somewhere deeper than her throat. The man stirred slightly, turning his head just enough that she could see more of his face in the low light. His expression was calm, but there was intensity beneath it. the kind that came from holding back rather than reaching forward. His eyes remained open now, listening. She did not look away, her voice lowered by instinct, not to tease, not to draw him closer, but to match the gravity of the moment. The sound carried easily, filling the space without effort. The man's jaw tightened briefly, then softened again. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, as if reminding himself to stay where he was. She felt a quiet heat rise in her chest. Not desire, recognition. She understood now that he was not simply listening because he enjoyed her voice. He was listening because it gave him something to hold on to when the night pressed too close. Something steady. Something that did not demand anything in return. Her voice carried on. She realized she had stopped thinking about the end of the book, stopped thinking about sunrise. The only thing that mattered was maintaining this fragile connection, built on sound and restraint. The silence between sentences felt heavier now, thicker with meaning. She handled it carefully, letting it exist without stretching it too far. The man's breathing remained even. She wondered what would happen when the voice stopped. The thought made her chest tighten, but she pushed it aside. This was not the moment for endings. She read on. The story spoke of nights that reshaped people without leaving, visible marks, of how some changes only revealed themselves in daylight. Her fingers brushed the edge of the page, steady. She felt herself leaning forward slightly, drawn closer by something she did not fully name, not toward him, but toward the space between them, toward the shared stillness. The warmth there felt almost tangible now. Her voice dipped again, softer, slower, wrapping around the words like they needed protection. The man exhaled, a sound that carried something close to relief. She felt it in her chest, a quiet response, a sense of having done something right without knowing exactly why. This was the need, not loud, not desperate, essential. He needed her voice to stay intact through the night. She needed the focus, the purpose, the quiet intensity of being relied on without being consumed. The realization settled into her gently. She read on, her voice steady, her posture relaxed, her awareness sharp. Every sound mattered. Every pause carried weight. The lamp flickered faintly, then steadied again. The shadows shifted but did not retreat. The night was still holding. She noticed the first signs of strain in her throat and adjusted without thinking, finding a softer register that carried just as clearly. Her voice had learned how to survive here. The man remained still, his attention unwavering. His presence filled the room without overwhelming it. They existed together in a careful balance. The story moved deeper into its middle, far from beginnings and endings, a place where things simply were. She felt it then, clearly. This night was changing her, not because of what was happening, but because of what was not. No touch, no names, no promises, just voice and listening, held together by choice. Her voice continued, low and steady, carrying the night forward one sentence at a time. Outside, the darkness pressed closer to the house, but inside the room, something held firm. And as the hours slipped quietly by, the need between them deepened, not as a hunger, but as a quiet certainty that neither of them was ready to release. The night began to loosen its grip, though it had not yet surrendered. She felt it before she saw any sign of change. The air no longer pressed so closely against her skin. The silence carried a different weight now, lighter, as if something beyond the walls had started to move. Her voice continued, but it had changed again. Not weaker, more careful. Each word felt deliberate, chosen not just to be heard, but to hold what remained of the night together. She sensed the fragile balance they were standing on, the narrow line between staying and slipping away. The man's breathing reflected it. It was no longer fully surrendered to her rhythm. There was awareness in it now, a quiet tension that had not been there before. He was still listening, but he was also preparing. She read on. The book was nearing its end. She felt it in the thinning weight of pages beneath her fingers, in the way the story no longer wandered, but began to narrow its focus. The words spoke of thresholds, of moments that could not be extended without cost. Her chest tightened. She slowed her pace, letting the sentences stretch just enough to resist the pull of what waited beyond them. Her voice dipped lower, softer, as if gentleness might delay the inevitable. The man shifted beneath the sheet. Not closer, not away, just enough to tell her that he felt it too. The space between them seemed charged now, alive with restraint. The warmth she had grown accustomed to felt sharper, more noticeable. She could sense the tension in his body, the way he held himself still through effort rather than ease. She did not look at him. She did not need to. Her voice filled the room, steady and calm, even as something inside her tightened. The sound carried her control, her intention to keep the night intact as long as possible. The lamp flickered again, dimmer this time. Shadows stretched and thinned, losing some of their density. The room felt exposed in a way it had not before. She read a passage about endings that arrived quietly, disguised as relief, about how letting go often felt like breaking something that had kept you alive. Her throat tightened around the words, but she did not falter. The man exhaled slowly, deeply, as if grounding himself. His breathing no longer followed her exactly. It moved with its own purpose now, measured and alert. She felt the shift. The need between them had changed shape. It was no longer only about holding the night together. It was about facing what came next without tearing the fragile connection they had built. She continued reading. Her voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of awareness. Every sentence felt heavier now, not because of its meaning, but because it carried them closer to an ending neither of them had named. The man turned his head slightly, bringing more of his face into the soft glow of the lamp. She caught the movement in her peripheral vision. His presence felt closer, more defined. Still, he did not speak. Still, she did not stop. The silence between paragraphs grew longer, not empty, weighted. She handled it carefully, letting it exist without allowing it to collapse into absence. The air felt different now, cooler, thinner. The room no longer felt sealed off from the world beyond it. Something outside was pressing closer, testing the edges. Her voice lowered again, instinctively protective. She stretched the words, softened their endings, and gave the night everything she had left to give. The man's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. His restraint was unmistakable. He was listening harder now, as if trying to absorb every detail, every nuance, every vibration of her voice. She felt a quiet ache in her chest. This closeness had never belonged to either of them. It had existed only because the night allowed it. She read on. The book reached its final section. The words grew simpler, more direct. There was no flourish now, no wandering, just resolution, just approaching with calm certainty. Her fingers brushed the edge of the last pages. She slowed further, careful not to rush, careful not to steal any moment they had left. Her voice remained low and even, carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. The man shifted again, this time sitting more upright beneath the sheet. The movement was controlled, deliberate. He was no longer resting in her voice. He was standing on his own within it. She felt the change immediately. The balance they had held all night had begun to fracture, not violently, but cleanly, like something meant to separate. She read the final pages. Each sentence felt like a step forward, away from the night, towards something unavoidable. The room grew quieter, not because her voice softened, but because the silence beyond it was learning how to exist again. Her voice carried the last lines with care, giving them space to settle, to be felt, rather than rushed. When she reached the final sentence, she did not pause. She read it gently, evenly, without ceremony. Then her voice stopped. The silence arrived all at once, not empty, not harsh, honest. The man inhaled deeply, his chest rising fully, freely. He sat up completely now, no longer guarded by the stillness of the bed. His presence felt different, solid, grounded. She remained seated, hands resting on the closed book, her body still, her awareness sharp. The quiet between them held for a long moment. Outside, the night finally loosened its grip. The darkness beyond the curtains thinned, no longer pressing inward. The room felt exposed, but not unsafe. They had crossed the thin line together. What remained was no longer held together by voice, alone. And as the silence settled into something calm rather than tense, she understood that the night had done its work. What came next would belong to the light. The light arrived slowly, almost respectfully. It filtered through the curtains in pale lines, touching the edges of the room without rushing in. The darkness did not vanish. It softened, releasing its hold piece by piece, as if it knew its work was finished. She stayed where she was, hands resting on the closed book, her body still carrying the echo of her own voice. Her throat felt warm and tired in a gentle way, the kind that came from having given something completely. The man stood near the bed now, not tense, not guarded, present. For the first time, his breathing moved without effort. It no longer searched for rhythm or guidance. It simply was. He looked at her, not at her mouth, not at the sound she had carried, but at her face. His expression was quieter than she expected. Clear, almost light. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. She nodded once. "I said I would." He smiled, just slightly, like someone testing a movement they had not used in a long time. "That mattered," he said. The silence between them felt different now. Open, no longer heavy with restraint. The night had stripped away what it needed to, leaving something honest behind. Footsteps sounded outside the room. The assistant returned, his presence no longer rigid. He placed an envelope on the small table beside her without ceremony. "It's done," he said quietly. The man shook his head. "No," he said. "It's complete." The distinction carried weight. The assistant inclined his head and stepped back, leaving the door open this time. Light from the hallway spilled in, brighter, warmer. She rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from her legs. The man noticed and moved instinctively, offering her the chair again before realizing she no longer needed it. They shared a small, almost awkward smile. The tension that had defined the night had loosened into something softer. "I didn't expect it to work like this," she said. "Neither did I," he replied. He walked toward the window and drew the curtains fully open. Morning flooded the room, clear and unfiltered. The city beyond looked ordinary, awake, unaware of what had passed inside these walls. "I've tried many ways to get through the night," he said quietly. "None of them lasted." She watched the sunlight settle on the floor, erasing the last traces of shadow. "You didn't need a cure," she said. "You needed company that didn't ask anything from you." He considered that, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it." She picked up the envelope but did not open it yet. "I won't be back tonight," she said. "I know," he replied, without sadness. The understanding between them felt complete, not broken. "This wasn't meant to continue," he added. "It was meant to change something." She felt the truth of it settle inside her. She walked toward the door, then paused. "Your nights will still be quiet," she said, "but they won't be empty." He smiled, fully this time. "And your voice," he said, "will still be yours." She stepped into the hallway, then down the stairs, the house feeling lighter with each step. The silence no longer pressed in, it simply existed. Outside, the morning air was cool and clean. The city moved around her, unaware, alive. She took a deep breath, feeling grounded in her body again, in her life. Behind her, in the quiet room filled with sunlight, a man stood by an open window, breathing easily, no longer waiting for night to save him. The night had changed everything, but the morning gave it back.